piece of land, it gives me a sense of social security. When I need a loan from the bank, I can deposit the land in the bank. It provides some basic needs also.
There is no piece of land in my name yet, but my parents, they have a few pieces of land in their names. I don't know, it's like kind of, okay, I don't have to worry about them. That's what I think. I'm not asking that land from them. Maybe that will be security enough for them. I can do on my own. This kind of security is something that I feel regarding land.
Can I speak in Nepali?
Please.
म चाहिँ एउटा विवाहित महिला हो हैन। मेरो विवाह भएको 24 वर्ष भइसक्यो र मेरो छोरा अहिले 22 वर्षको छ। उ अहिले अस्ट्रेलियामा छ हैन। मेरो नाममा चाहिँ कुनै ल्यान्ड छैन। मेरो श्रीमानको नाममा छ। तर पनि हामीले त्यो ल्यान्ड त्यस्तोसँग चाहिँ मैले प्रयोग गरिन। मतलब हामी जे कमायौं त्यही कमाइले मेरो बच्चा पढायो भनेपछि आजको दिनसम्म मलाई ल्यान्ड चाहिएको छैन। र यो जेन्डरको इस्युबाट चाहिँ हाम्रो घरमा त्यो हैन ल्यान्डको विषयमा कहिले पनि इस्यु निस्केन भनौँ न। श्रीमानको नाममा हुने कि श्रीमतीको नाममा हुने कि अथवा त्यो चाहिँ ननिस्किन आजको दिनसम्म छ हैन। अनि म चाहिँ मोनिका म्याडमबाट चाहिँ अब कस्तो खालको तपाईले चाहिँ टपिक उठाउनुहुन्छ यो हैन जेन्डर रिलेसनशिप टु ल्यान्ड इन मधेस भनेर लेख्नु भएको छ। के अरे यो टपिकमा बोल्दै हुनुहुन्छ, रिसर्च गर्नु भएको छ। त्यो चाहिँ अब भ्यू मलाई बुझ्नु छ। त्यति नै हुन्छ।
Thank you. Excuse me. Share हजुर भन्दै गर्नुहोस्।
म चाहिँ मिलन्स मेरो घर चाहिँ मिलन्स हो। अनि अहिले चाहिँ त्यहाँ बाढी पहिरो आइरहन्छ नि। अनि सो मेरो पनि आफ्नो मेरो त होइन कि मेरो बाबाको चाहिँ पुरै जग्गा छ। अनि कहिले बाढी आउँछ कहिले पहिरो आउँछ त्यही पनि लान थालिसक्यो। तर एकदमै सुरक्षित ठाउँमा होस् अनि आफूलाई चाहिँ खान पुग्ने खाले जग्गा होस्। त्यस पछाडि पढ्दाखेरि एजुकेसन यति धेरै महँगो भइसक्यो कि अब ब्याचलर त जेनतेन गरिरहेको छ। तर मास्टर्स गर्नको लागि पनि चाहिँ ल्यान्ड भएको त्यो बचेको भए चाहिँ सायद त्यो ल्यान्ड बेचेर अथवा केही गरेर चाहिँ पढिन्थ्यो होला भन्ने जस्तो लाग्छ। त्यो ठुलो एक्सपेक्टेसन चाहिँ छैन जग्गाप्रति। त्यही हो।
एट द एज अफ 19 यो कुरा के सोच्ने भन्ने नि थाहा भएन। तर मलाई चाहिँ के लाग्छ भने ल्यान्ड भन्दा हाम्रो बेसिक निड्स चाहिँ इम्पोर्टेन्ट हुन्छ।
I don't own any piece of land, much like others, but like I said, I also fall back on them. It's my father's ancestral and all. It does gives me a sense of, security, which is much needed, and also that feeling of, somehow getting closer to your roots, to people you've never met but are related to you. But also somehow a sense of a power to displace others. Yeah, that's it.
थोरै ल्यान्ड छ हैन। मेरो आफ्नो निजी कमाइबाट किनेको मधेसमा। र यो ल्यान्डको कुरा चाहिँ यो कस्तो भने यो जुन हाम्रो समाजमा त्यो जेन्डर डिस्क्रिमिनेसन हुन्छ नि हो यो कारणले चाहिँ यस्ता इस्युजहरू उठ्ने हुन् हैन। तर ल्यान्ड भनेको चाहिँ यति महत्त्वपूर्ण अपरिहार्य कुरा हो हैन। अहिले अब हाम्रो समाजमा चाहिँ यस्तो छ कि जग्गा बेच्नै पर्ने भनेको जस्तो कुराहरूको चाहिँ विकास भइराखेको छ। तर यो हुनु चाहिँ राम्रो कुरा होइन मेरो धारणा। किनभने जुन एउटा धरातल उभिने धरती नै भएन भने हामीले जति पैसा कमाए पनि जे गरे पनि जहाँ गए पनि के नै हुने हो र। आखिर यो विश्व यो एउटा पृथ्वी भनेको त एउटै हो नि त। त्यसकारण यो ल्यान्डलाई चाहिँ अलिकति राम्रो गर्ने संरक्षण गर्ने अनि जुन महिला पुरुषको डिस्क्रिमिनेसन छ नि हो यो डिस्क्रिमिनेसनले चाहिँ यो अब जग्गाहरू पनि यो टुट यताउता यो बाँडफाँड हुने यस्तो भएको मेरो बारेमा।
idea what to tell.
That's okay. We can
I'll
skip.
hear from
Okay.
you.
Sounds good. अरू कोही सेयर गर्न चाहनुहुन्छ? प्रेसर पनि छैन, you don't have to.
Line in.
Okay. Thank you so much for sharing. It was really interesting to hear. I think त्यही कुराहरू नै फेरि सुन्नुहुन्छ होला हैन. Relationship to land चाहिँ gendered छ भन्ने कुरा. So what does it mean हैन? When we heard from many of our male friends or male identifying friends, I apologize if I'm misgendering you, you feel secure, right? A sense of security, a sense of connectedness, a sense of belongingness, a sense of being able to connect to roots, to lineage. That gives you social, political, cultural status and identity. But when we talk about women presenting, identifying folks, it's a bit different. It doesn't, the same sense of connectedness is not there. Maybe there's a sense of longing, a sense of lack of security, but not that sense of belongingness, right? Not that sense of being connected to your roots. One of the participants in my study shared something which really sticks to this day is women have no home. We're perpetual guests, right? And so त्यो कन्टेक्स्टै अलिकता फरक भयो हैन. तर धेरै पनि नबिचलियौँ होला. Because have some patience, please, while we figure out. Okay, so I think where did this all start, right? Like, why look at land? Why look at gendered relationships to land? The perplexity that really bugged me. Development विषय नै निकै नै बग गर्छ सधैँ पनि, तर यो पर्प्लेक्सिटीले चाहिँ धेरै नै बग गर्यो कि women have equal rights to land, right? But this has not changed the quantity of women's land ownership, and not just that, women seem to not claim land. I know. I'm really like, why? So that's what led to this research. We know even today that only 19.7% of women own around 5% of land all over Nepal, and only 11% have effective control over their property, because having a title does not necessarily translate into effective control over property, right? And then why Madhesh, right? Like, look at land, look at anywhere else. Why look at Madhesh? I think just alikata field ma katai research garna जाँदाखेरि एउटा conspicuous absence of women, the response with which it was shared as to why women were not present in public spaces really inspired a desire to understand gendered relationships better. Ani, while I say that, I'm definitely an outsider. Ma bhasha pani boldina, हैन न म भोजपुरी बोल्छु, मैथिली बोल्छु, अवधी बोल्छु. I am definitely a Brahmin woman of hill origin, Western educated, हैन. So all of those positionalities of mine definitely influence how I'm looking at this study, how I'm sharing my findings with you, how my participants spoke to me. I come from the school of thought that research is a product of what happens, the exchange that happens between the researcher and the researched. So obviously my positionality is a big factor in what I'm going to be sharing with you, and also a limitation, right? I will also say that in some ways I am also an insider, because the gender norms still apply to me. So, for example, I think as a young woman, a politician rang me at 5 a.m. and demanded to be interviewed immediately. There were times when men presented very aggressively for some reason, performing ultra-masculine roles, and I found myself performing the damsel in distress role, which was beneficial. It led me to other contacts and other people who I could speak to. So I think I just want to start with the preface that this data analysis was performed with an awareness that what is said here is the outcome of the interview context and not a big generalized fact that I can say applies to all contexts, right? So, is we good? Okay. What is my thesis? भन्दाखेरि जे तपाईहरुले अघि भन्नुभयो हैन, मेल र फिमेल आइडेन्टिटीज र सब्जेक्टिभिटीजहरु चाहिँ ल्यान्ड रिलेसन्ससँग एकदमै इन्ट्रिकेटली कनेक्टेड हुन्छ, एन्ड दे डिफर. So your identity, obviously our identity doesn't remain stagnant through our lives, and so our relationships to land also changes, right? And it changes based on our age, life cycle, caste, relative wealth, and all of the other intersectionalities that make us who we are. And I think the big, I guess, claim here is that men and women have different relationships to land based on their subject positionalities and other identity markers. So yes, gender is important, but also other identity markers are important. हैन, कसैले indigeneity को कुरा गर्नुभयो. So there are historical, local, global, material contexts that are also influencing land relationships, and so land struggles are not material struggles only, but they're really complex power struggles about identity. And so why do women then, going back to the perplexity, कानुन बनिसक्यो कति साल भइसक्यो तैपनि यो क्वान्टिटीमा चेन्ज किन नआउने र हाम्रो चाहिँ women appear to not claim land at all, हैन? That's the biggest perplexity for me. And so land policies that are not engaging with that social nature of land are really unlikely to transform inequitable land relationships, is what I claim. Yes. All right. Methodology was semi-structured interviews. There were a few participants. This happened during COVID. And the methodology kind of changed as the COVID landscape changed. So initially I planned to do in-person interviews, later that became social media interviews. Yeah, so some of the qualities of the audios that were recorded were so bad that they couldn't be analyzed. What that meant for the research was that the initial participants that I had hoped to speak to, I wasn't able to anymore. Particularly rural Nepalma internet access नभएको मान्छेहरू चाहिँ were not participants in this study, right? Yeah, so as I said, 7 recordings were so disturbed that they couldn't be used for data analysis, and so the methodology adapted based on what was feasible and possible in the context of COVID at the time. Limitation, अघि पनि कुरा गरिहाले. I think one of the big limitations is obviously my own gender identity and my socialization as a woman, and well, I guess how people look at my gender identity and my subjectivity, and so what they share with me is also really dependent on that perceived gender identity. A further limitation, it does not include non-binary gender voices. This is just looking at cis men and cis women and their relationships to land. This was a purposeful choice though, because given the limited number of other studies for gender non-binary folks, I don't think this study could have done any justice in even scratching the surface. Literaturely के भन्छ त ल्यान्डको विषयमा, that slides can be a bit text heavy, I apologize, and don't look good at all. So land struggles are about power relationships, हैन? Women do not claim independent land titles unless their relationships to men fail. and I will talk more about why that is. In social symbolic realms, women have no land rights, right? Women have no home. We are perpetual guests. Women have secondary rights to land, though. I know we're not complete victims. We do have use and access rights based on our relationships to men. And the access to land and the legitimacy of those claims, I know, त्यो जुन use र access rights हरु छ, त्यो rights हरु पनि really depend on our subject positionalities and the performance of a good woman role. So if you cannot perform the good woman role, you have no claims to land, use or access, funny, right? So I think alikata chai it's important to look at caste because sabai men ko relationships to land pani एउटै हुँदैन हैन अघि नै भने based on different subject positionalities they are quite different. And for upper and middle caste Madhesi men ko लागि जति central छ land identity को लागि त्यति women को छैन र त्यति men of occupational castes हरु को लागि पनि छैन हैन because while land symbolizes masculinity and lineage for some it symbolizes dispossession and oppression for others, right? And so this lack of land for Dalit men particularly has created this cycle of dependency or disempowerment, really severely limits access to other livelihood choices. त्यो जुन fallback security भन्नुभयो नि कतिजनाले त्यो नभएको कारणले चाहिँ विभिन्न अरू life choices हरु पनि significantly they look different and what they have access to in terms of livelihood opportunities, right? So what I'm saying here, what many folks are saying here, is that besides gender, there are other identities like caste, ethnicity, region that determine exclusion from land. Do you have any questions so far? No? Okay. So it is not that agi pani bhane women are not just victims, हैन? Women do use strategies to access the land rights that they have, right? The use and access rights that they have through particularly marriage. And in Madhesh, women depend on men for secure access to resources, and women's status is also very intricately connected to men's status. So if your husband's status is good, your status is also good. So unless marriage is failing, and women are threatened with destitution, actually staking a claim for independent land titles is going to risk marital failure, and women are not going to risk marital failure because of all of the other gendered institutions around us that mean that there is no lack of security for women at all outside of marriage. So life outside of marriage for women is very risky, and so claiming independent titles would increase that risk of having to live outside of marriage, and so women do not claim land titles. Their characters also become vulnerable to question, particularly even in the case of when women are threatened with destitution, divorce, abuse cases. Usually these are when women claim land. And usually the strategies that are employed to weaken women's land claims are around character assassination, accusation of witchcraft, and things like that. So most women prefer to use indirect strategies to access resources. And that one of those in... sorry, I have too many slides, but we won't get through all of them, don't worry. So I think त्यो कुरामा आउँदा आउँदै अलिकता चाहिँ नेपाली इनइक्वालिटिजको कन्टेक्स्टले पनि अघि भने जस्तो लोकल ग्लोबल रिजनल मटेरियल कन्टेक्स्ट रियली इन्फ्लुएन्स आवर रिलेसनशिप्स टु ल्यान्ड यो दुईटा टर्म्सहरू के हो भनेर मलाई नसुन्नु होला because the terms Madhesh and Madhesi are really questioned and challenged and contested, but the discrimination of Madhesis is not. And so cultural, linguistic proximity, similarity in appearances with people across the border have been some of the bases on which marginalization vis-a-vis the state has happened. The hill-based ruling groups have regarded Madhesi people as less Nepali because of the languages they speak. The India-Nepal border in many parts of Madhesh is simply a geographical border, as we all know, and kin groups extend across the border, due to which Madhesis again are often called Indian. And progressive citizenship laws in Nepal have always been discriminatory towards Madhesis. Subsequent citizenship distribution programs have tried to address this issue, but it's almost like going around in circles, because to get citizenship you need land, to get land you need citizenship, to get citizenship you need Nepali, right? So it's almost been like a cat chasing its tail. And so this context has really also affected how and who is able to register land and have land ownership in Nepal. At the same time, there are, like I said before, a lot of different intersectionalities, and so making the context of inequalities quite difficult to look at just the gender binary, right? Because there are interactions between caste, class, gender, region. And as we know, historically, Nepal has been feudalistic, hierarchical society where women, Dalits, and ethnic minorities have been excluded. नेपालको पहिलो सिभिल कोड जसले चाहिँ यो पेट्रिलिनियल हायरार्किकल कास्ट बेस्ड हिन्दू सोसाइटीलाई चाहिँ इन्स्टिट्युसनलाइज गर्यो, त्यसले चाहिँ लिगली लोवर कास्ट कम्युनिटिजहरूलाई ल्यान्ड ओनरशिपबाट पनि एक्सक्लुड गर्यो. सो इन एडिसन टु द्याट, many middle and lower caste groups of Madhesh were also excluded from the Muluki Ain. Many continue to be excluded in the censuses that happen even today. So many communities are unrecorded, unrecognized. And this leads to questions about representation, questions about policies really being able to address some issues of exclusion if there is no recognition of identity at all. Historically then, land was also used by rulers and state representatives to establish elites at the peripheries, right? So what that meant is ruling class elites were sent to the periphery, Madhesh, to establish control over those territories. And what that meant was the establishment of a zamindari system, which was controlled, expanded by the state, and led to dispossession of folks who have previously historically owned land. And also this land, all able persons were required to work this land that belonged to their elite. So यो over time चाहिँ यस्ता different intersections ले गर्दा आएका inequalities र inequitable land distribution चाहिँ solidified भएर class hierarchies हरू अहिलेको context मा देखिन्छ, and we see a very small group of powerful land owning elites and a very skewed ownership of land, and particularly around effective control over land, right? Small number of landowners in Nepal control most of the fertile land. And men own 92% of the land. Many Dalits, 44% of Madhesi Dalits specifically, are landless. अब जेन्डरको कुरा गर्दाखेरि चाहिँ 2002, this still aghast me, I'm horrified, but until 2002, only unmarried daughters over 35 were entitled to inherit parental property. Upon marriage, you had to return that property. Yet, married daughters could not claim property, and only in 2002 was it that widows who remarried could get a share of their husband's property. 2002 is like 20 years ago, no? Less?
20.
Yeah, 20 years ago. In 2006, after the introduction of the Gender Equality Act, a daughter's equal right to inheritance was recognized. So after marriage, she didn't have to return the property anymore. However, married daughters still could not own property. Natal property, right? Parental property. But it was then, in 2006, that this act also allowed women to dispose of property without getting consent from males. So, agi bhane thi, effective control ko kura aayo haina. You can own land, sure, but if you can't get a loan by putting up the land in the bank, what kind of an asset does it become? Haina? Does it risk the potential of becoming a non-asset effectively? भन्ने पनि क्वेसन गर्न सकिन्छ. अब अहिलेको कन्स्टिट्युसनले चाहिँ सबै अफस्प्रिङ्सहरूलाई इक्वल सेयर इन पेरेन्टल प्रपर्टी दिया छ. Also, the financial bill provides 25%, 35% tax exemption if land is registered in women's name, single women's name. र यो कन्टेक्स्टमा अर्को चाहिँ के पनि भइरहेछ भन्दाखेरि ल्यान्ड चाहिँ people are moving away from farming, right? Which is considered a dirty job now. At the same time, your out-migration of males hudakheri chai agriculture is becoming feminized. So agricultural laborers on the field are women, but they do not own the land, right? They're working in somebody else's fields. And these farms are still largely owned, managed by men. Gender agi bhane jastै not an isolated island. These subjectivities in relationships vary by caste, region, and class. There is a tendency in our context to conflate caste with class, but I find otherwise, because castes at the lower end of the hierarchy are usually poor, but huge class differences among castes that fall in the middle of the caste hierarchy. I know some upper caste households are very wealthy, few are poor, many are middle class. र यो क्लास र कास्टको डिफरेन्सेसले गर्दाखेरि चाहिँ जेन्डर्ड ल्यान्ड रिलेसनशिप्स पनि निकै डिफरेन्ट देखिन्छ. एन्ड so what I'm saying here is that these are complex, they're related to other social political problems and not easy to analyze in isolation, right? Agi pani kura गरियो, it's more than a material resource, there's so much more to land. It offers a sense of belongingness. Ancestral land particularly has more symbolic importance for men. र ल्यान्डको चाहिँ रिचुअल भ्याल्यु पनि हुने भयो हैन, and it provides more stability than other assets. People usually feel more secure if they have a piece of land than if they have other assets. अब आइडेन्टिटिजको कुरामा आऊ, अघि अलिकति जोडिँदै थियो कि we are all influenced, we all play in this patriarchal game, right? And we are all making bargains. And so our choices, both men and women, are really constricted by the patriarchal bargain. So we're not all free at all, हैन? र यो जेन्डर आइडेन्टिटिजहरू चाहिँ आफ्नो कन्टेक्स्ट र अरू सोशल पोलिटिकल फ्याक्टर्सले गर्दाखेरि चाहिँ इट इज हेटेरोजेनस, हैन? So we can't just club men and women and say, okay, women feel like this and men feel like this, because there's so many other distinguishing factors, right? And particularly also it's really interesting to note that men or women over the course of their life cycles, their relative power or control and access to land also changes. I know with age it looks very different for men, right? अब masculinities र ल्यान्डको कुरा गर्दाखेरि चाहिँ men in the patriarchal bargain को चाहिँ they don't have a choice, but they have to fulfill provider roles, right? They are responsible for providing for the household र land चाहिँ effectively त्यो provider role fulfill गर्नको लागि एकदमै essential हुन्छ, particularly in a context where access to other things constricted, right? So livelihood opportunities are limited, and it's increasingly difficult for men to fulfill these provider roles that they have to fulfill, right? To the extent that we could argue that maybe men are in crisis as well. And land, यो कन्टेक्स्टमा झनै men हुन्छ र in context of enhanced risk चाहिँ patrilineage चाहिँ अझै पनि rigidify हुन्छ, and women's rights to land can be really threatened and questioned. It can be risky in this context, right? अब not all men पनि भन्नै पर्यो. There is really an intense competition for land among men, and not all men have access to land, right? Particularly यो अघिको threat जुन भने नि lack of access to other opportunities, त्यो कन्टेक्स्टमा चाहिँ womenको claimsहरू चाहिँ directly threatening men's claims to land हुन सक्छ, हैन? र not all men enjoy equal rights to land within the household. Usually it is a lot of us here shared that your father owns the land, हैन? It is misleading to consider that all men are certain heirs in patriarchy, right? Senior males command more resources. A lot of land conflicts are between men. It's a really widely contested issue, to the extent that a lawyer claimed that the largest number of cases in court are around land disputes between men. केही छ अहिलेसम्म विचारहरू, questions? छैन? So women को subjectivities को कुरा गरौँ हैन? Women को subjectivities, their identities are rooted in roles expected of them. They do have identities beyond these roles, but यो identities exert गर्दाखेरि चाहिँ they can face undesirable consequences, including violence, right? Or threats of violence. So in patriarchy, यो bargain को कुरा गर्दै थियौ, bargain गर्दाखेरि चाहिँ women bargain from a disadvantaged position in patriarchy, right? So livelihood security को कुरा गर्दा पनि women are more disadvantaged than men because of both intra-household र institutional inequalities, हैन? र women को behavior, why I'm saying all this, because we were asking the question, why do women not claim land, हैन? So their behavior is likely to be shaped by all of these different contexts, particularly the fact that men have more access to resources in contexts with high risk, right? Men's rights to land are based on their membership in the kin group, हैन? They are part of the lineage, they belong, right? But women's rights are based on marriage. Social symbolic realms मा त भनिहाल्यो, women don't have land rights. यो potential transfer of land out of the patrilineage is really used to deny women access to land. Women who demand their rights, it seems, really face resistance in the form of, character assassination को कुरा गरिहाले, often leads to violence, often of a sexual nature, and even from not just in-laws but natal family, even children. त्यो भन्दा भन्दै अघि पनि भने used access rights छ, तर these are conditional and dependent on the status of their relationships to men. So if tomorrow you're not a good wife anymore, your claim is non-existent, it doesn't have a basis. And so your rights to land, these are part and parcel for women of the roles that we are to fulfill for the household and not an absolute individual right. Then how do women resist the vanyo? I know we're not just victims. So how women resist is by exercising informal decision-making power through daily struggles for resistance, right? Particularly, I think, unless threatened with destitution, these claims, these forms of resistance do not take public form and are visible outside, right? Passive resistance, what it takes the form of is taking your half of the patriarchal bargain, which is performing the role of a good wife, good daughter, good mother, good woman, and then reaping the promised reward, which is what security, economic security, physical security in return for submissiveness. And sometimes, actually, just not registering land in one's name is a strategy that women employ to access use rights within the kin group. It is also found that your entitlement for fulfilling your part in the patriarchal bargain, this seems to be the most secure way to access land. And building a reputation of a deserving wife is really crucial here and can be beneficial. It might only be possible to gain that status and security through motherhood, particularly bearing sons is really key. Womenले stake claim गर्दा पनि use र access stakes claim गर्दाखेरि पनि चाहिँ marital property मा गरेको देखिन्छ र natal property मा नगरेको देखिन्छ किन भन्दाखेरि त्यो relationships with brothers is really important in a context where marital failure can really leave you destitute, right? And this appears to be true even in the context of women of upper class, upper caste women ko lagi pani, because even though you are economically secure in marriage, the threat of divorce, the threat of having to live outside of a marriage can really challenge your financial security. So it's easier, it's safer to claim land, use rights to land instead of independent titles within the marriage, right now. Women invest in certain identities over others to attain their interests. And your performance of following rules of societal conduct or maintaining the image of a good wife, good woman is a really powerful tool that can be used to recruit social support and legitimacy for a land claim, because what happens when your marriage does fail? Right? Marriage work you do have your land. That access is secure. But when marriage fails, what happens? When you have to take this to a public forum now. त्यो context ma chai, if you've not invested over time in really ensuring that your reputation and identity as a good woman or good wife are secure, then your claim pani is not going to work, because usually for women's land rights claims to be realized, it requires the support of powerful men in the community. And these powerful men in the community are going to support good women, not characterless women, right? There's also the question of the men who your character assassination frequently used to weaken claims, particularly those men who support women's land claims are then involved in your character assassination including saying things like you killed your husband if it's a widow. Accusations of witchcraft are really common as well. Arko कुरा भनेको चाहिँ cyclical nature of power in women's lives, right? Because from going to a husband's house to a stranger's house at a very tender age where you really have no say and no power. So women go from being an outsider to really being indispensable to the family, particularly once they perform their reproduction roles well. So your power within the household, access to again land within the household inside of a marriage really changes over the course of a woman's life cycle. So older women usually have more access to land than younger women or new daughters-in-law, right? Men ko lagi चाहिँ अलिकता different देखिन्छ. As men get older, their control usually seem to lessen, हैन? र यो decreasing control over land चाहिँ particularly after your intergenerational transfer of land भइसक्छ. त्यो भइसकेपछि चाहिँ for men it appears that they keep a small plot of land for जीविका, तर त्यो जीविका पनि becomes छोराहरूको आँखाको बोझ, हैन? So it's really like त्यो security त हो हैन for old age. If I have my plot of land, my children will treat me well, or at least one will take care of me in my old age because they will get this जीविका हैन. तर कसो कसो गरेर त्यो पनि conflict को case चाहिँ भइराको हुन्छ where sons really want that property as well. So men को चाहिँ over the course of the life cycle, it appears that they lose control. Women को it appears the other way around. Tara, we can also see that generalize garna अलि गाह्रै छ because daughters-in-law sometimes seem to tilt that power balance in the household, particularly if they can sway the affection of their husband towards them, and that is a good way that they can get more control and access to resources. Last मा एउटा के कुरा भन्छु भन्दाखेरि gender relationships चाहिँ they're simultaneously sites of conflict but also of cooperation. There is a lot of love in these relationships which don't really form the basis of many studies. And so when we look at land struggles, when we look at land conflict, it is important to recognize the love and affection that exists in a marriage. So when women are claiming land, it really, there's a combined interest in a marriage that folks are working towards, right? So if symbolic status comes from your husband's symbolic status, there is benefit to protecting that symbolic status and not challenging it, right? But as long as, again, the marital relationship prevails, it is rarely found necessary to question these shared rights. I think a lot of authors argue this. I'm not sure if I fully agree, but I will just throw it out there. Is women don't want to break away from the fabric of society and make it on their own. What women are looking for is a more equitable status within the fabric of society and within the relationships that exist. So it is not a case of, I don't want to participate, but it is really I want to participate from a more equitable space. And so given everything else that it means, and given the gendered nature of institutions that we live in and the society that we live in, what I find is that women do not claim access to land or individual rights to land because it just isn't worth it. You have too much to lose and too little to gain. Particularly when it comes to relationships with men and their relationships to land. There is so much symbolic connection and lineage and connectedness and belongingness for men that comes from land, which for women it does not. And I will leave it there. Thank you very much.